He sat quietly in the corner of the Gryffindor common room. In his hands was a fifth-year transfiguration text. At this late hour, the expansive room was empty except for this one boy. His pale eyes skimmed across the page as he finished his homework. Tomorrow would be a full moon, and he didn't want school to ruin that fun. Anyway, he had a lot on his mind. He glanced down at the letter that had arrived by owl post just that evening. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't even look up when a dormitory door creaked open and someone came down the stairs. "Don't worry," he growled. "I'm coming already." James had only come downstairs 4 times that night to bug him about sleep. "Sirius Black," said a decidedly female voice. "Don't you dare take that tone with me." "Andromeda." Sirius' eyes widened and his head snapped up. At the base of the stairs stood an attractive, dark-haired girl, only a year younger than himself, his favorite cousin. Andromeda walked over to the sofa he sat on and plopped down beside him. Her hair was up in curlers. She arched an eyebrow at him and eyed his work. "This is a first," she purred, her lips curing into a smile. "You're doing your homework instead of Remus. What's the occasion?" Sirius made a face at her. "Ha, ha, I'll have you know that I work hard for every answer Remus gives me." Andromeda just rolled her eyes as he laughed. But even his laughter didn't quite hide the strain in his eyes. "This stuff isn't hard, really, when I do it. I just need practice. I need high marks on my OWLs." "Since when?" Sirius glared at her, but like a true Black, she didn't back down. "Come on, Sirius. You've never cared about grades. Now suddenly you do. If I want to get a job." "Since when do you care about that either?" Andromeda looked skeptical. "What happened to that plan you had when you were 8 where you'd mooch off of Aunt Medea for the rest of your life?" Her eyes were teasing now. Gringotts Bank was one of the oldest and most elegant wizarding structures in London. The white marble was intricately carved and finely polished. Miles of tunnels beneath London made up the majority of the structure, wrapping around the London Underground and in some areas, spanning beyond the barriers of the city itself. Gringotts was like a city of its own, populated by goblins, a quiet break from the chaos of Diagon Alley outside. And unlike many other buildings of the wizarding world, there was nothing rickety or abnormal appearing about it. This structure could stand even if magic were to fall. It was common knowledge that this bank was the safest place in the wizarding world, except perhaps for Hogwarts. It was crafted to stand through anything. This assumption was about to be tested. Word had spread that Gringotts held something of special value, of immense power, something that Voldemort wanted. Breaching the bank was no easy matter, so it wasn't as though a threat like this could honestly be taken seriously. The Ministry of Magic sent a few first-year Aurors and 1 veteran to guard the bank, more to quiet the public than anything. No need to waste manpower when the more skilled in the department were needed elsewhere. In the past, many people had tried to steal from the goblins. In the past, they had all been caught. But that was the past, and this time was different. Early that morning, the silence was broken as screams were heard just outside of the building. The doors swung open, and 20 men in black cloaks and featureless white masks swept into the bank. A full detachment of Death Eaters. No one had seen this coming. The main lobby broke into echoing screams as terrified witches and wizards tried to flee. Before any could reach the entrance, the main doors were firmly shut by an elegantly dressed wizard. With a flick of his wand, the lock was set as he casually turned to address the panicking crowd. He was a Death Eater, like the others, although his face wasn't hidden behind a mask. He hid nothing. Even the sleeves of his robes were rolled up, so the dark mark was clearly visible on his left forearm. His cold gray eyes scanned the group as he slowly walked to the front of the detachment, his silver and black boots clicking on the marble floor. The room fell silent as he stopped in the center of the lobby and motioned toward one of the goblins. I am making a withdrawal. Vault 713. The goblin didn't seem perturbed. Do you have a letter? The man smiled coldly. What do you think? Without waiting for a response, he turned back to the Death Eaters. Take the vault. Kill anyone and anything that gets in your way. He paused, his gray eyes glittering. And remember, we aren't here to have fun. The Death Eaters attacked just as a side door burst open and the Aurors moved into action. But effective action was difficult for 9 inexperienced first years. They only seemed to be adding to the fear and chaos. The first bolt of green light was in the back of the bank. A young red-haired wizard fell. Marcus Stanton, the only experienced Auror on the premises, cursed under his breath. This was going to be a massacre if they didn't do anything soon. He told Crouch that they needed to take this rumor seriously, but the minister had refused to listen. Rumors were rumors, but if they involved Sirius Black, there was always enough truth in them to act. Stanton grabbed the Auror nearest to him by the collar and dragged her down as she was almost hit by a rogue Crucius curse. More bodies fell. The sick thing was that the screams gave him hope. The Death Eaters weren't killing immediately, but that wouldn't last. Black didn't play games. Several of Stanton's team were already retaliating, crouched behind counters, blasting stun spells when they could get a clear shot. 5 Death Eaters actually went down. Too bad there were 15 more. The other Aurors were just trying to keep casualties down by dragging bystanders out of the way. This group deserved an award. They may have started slow, but even Stanton was impressed by their quick responses now that it counted. The chaos was finally dying down enough for Stanton to notice Black's absence. His eyes roved across the devastation until he spotted several fallen goblins and an open door behind the main counter. Shit, he's in. Stanton turned to the blonde Auror beside him. Keep the situation under control out here. Then he dove into the chaos once more, shooting off both defensive and offensive spells as he ran for the door. He almost stumbled over one of the goblins' bodies, lying in his path. This one seemed to have put up a fight and had lost a hand in the process. Stanton didn't let it faze him. He'd seen worse. A woman's voice rang out from where he'd been moments before. Hold them back. Black's through. Jackson, you lead. She was behind Stanton again in moments. What do you think you're doing? Her defiant eyes flashed red. He should have seen this coming from her. Like hell, I'm going to let you try to take down Black by yourself. Even you can't do that alone. He'd have throttled her if he hadn't known she was right. The graying man glowered at her before breaking into a run toward the carts. One was already missing. No surprise there. He hopped into the next one. Get in, he growled. If you so much as make a sound that puts us in danger, you'll be out of active duty for as long as I can swing it. She nodded and got in. The ride was wild. They moved faster than the carts were supposed to go, and without the guide of a goblin. If Stanton hadn't made sure to learn to route to this particular vault as soon as he'd been assigned here, they'd have been lost. He didn't waste time wondering how Black had found out. Somehow Black always found out. That was why when they finally stopped, even though only goblins were supposed to be able to open high-security vaults, Stanton wasn't surprised to see Black had found a way past that particular security system. The door wasn't open yet, but he could hear the locks clicking free. Black dropped the goblin's now useless hand to the ground as he drew his wand and aimed. Avada Kedavra! Stanton threw himself out of the way at the last second. His newly acquired partner strategically tripped at the right time and landed on top of him. Stanton shoved her off and rolled to his feet before Black had another spell out. The contents of the vault would be his in moments. He had to be stopped immediately. Petrificus totalis. Black laughed and sidestepped it, nodding casually to Stanton. He sent another death curse toward the Auror, who was already diving behind the cart. Obstacles didn't stop Black. Inflammatory. The cart was up in flames, and Stanton was forced to dodge again. Magum Reflectory. Stanton's reversal spell was perfectly timed, as Black had just sent a death curse toward him one final time. Even though the force of the spell did throw Stanton's wand out of reach, it was hard not to enjoy the moment as Black was forced to hit the ground to avoid dying by his own magic. But even this was short-lived. Black rolled to a crouch even as the vault door began creaking open. He made a move for it and ran into a barrier. took Stanton a moment to realize what had happened. Unfortunately, Black noticed the girl a moment sooner, just as she completed setting the ward on the door. Stanton struggled to his feet, a twisted knee, and his wand had flown at least 10 feet away, somewhere into the shadows. If he didn't find it quickly enough, the girl would be dead. She managed to dodge the first 2 of Black's death curses, stumbled out of the way of a third, and by sheer luck deflected a 4th. But she was wearing down, and Black was losing patience. He didn't have time to break down a ward with 2 Aurors bearing down on him. So he needed to kill its creator to get his prize. "You're fast," he commented, shooting another spell. "I'll give you that little girl. But if I can't kill you quickly..." He changed stance and finally hit her with a crucious curse. "Then I'll have to resort to dirty work." She immediately dropped to the floor in pain as he sent a second and third in rapid succession. Only after he was sure she could no longer move did Black come over to her and crouch beside her trembling body. "Word to the wise, the crucious curse has a wide range. Even you aren't fast enough to dodge it. Although I must say I'm impressed. I haven't had to resort to that spell in ages." He lowered his wand until it was touching her forehead. She was too weak to move. "I don't think I'll miss this time." Stanton finally spotted his wand, but he knew it would be too late. He saw the girl's head slowly raise. Her eyes were glossed in pain and her focus was waning. As he watched, the pain forced young Morphomagus to shift into her natural form. Short, black hair brushed her shoulders as her own gray eyes met his. Stanton couldn't understand what happened next, but suddenly Black's wand was down, and he was on his feet, backing away from her. The older Auror didn't waste time worrying about it. Whatever she'd done, it had bought him the time he needed. Stanton swung his own arm up, muttering to himself, "Forgive me," before resorting to an Auror's last resort. Avada Kedavra! Something was wrong with Black. It was as though time had momentarily stopped for him, and by the time he realized he was being attacked, a defensive measure was impossible. If it had been anybody else, Stanton knew that the Death Eater would have been dead. But it was Black, and he'd managed to apparate a second before the spell hit him. This time, however, it wasn't about catching Black. The vault was protected and they were both alive. That was what mattered right now. Stanton limped over to the fallen Auror. She was still too weak to even sit up. He knelt beside her. "Don't try to move. We'll apparate you to St. Mungo's. You'll be fine in no time." She was still staring where Black had been. Stanton followed her gaze. "Listen," he said. "What did you do to get him to back off like that?" She didn't tear her eyes from where he'd been standing moments before. "Nothing. He just looked at me and..." Her voice trailed off, as though she were trying to figure something out. "Tonks." She finally looked at him. "He called me my mum's name." "What?" Tonks shook her head. "I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me either, but that's what he did. He just backed off when I looked at him and called me Andromeda." Sirius glanced back at the letter. "Give me a break. Mum won't give me a cent, especially not if she can spend it on perfect Regulus. He was accepted to Durmstrang, you know." The bitterness cut the air like a knife, leaving a momentary rift between them. Andromeda's eyes traveled to the letter as things mentally began falling into place. "So that's what this is about, huh? You do realize that your little brother is a stupid git, don't you?" Sirius slammed his book shut, his gray eyes flashing. "Well, he's the stupid git my parents care about. He can do no wrong. He's in the school they want. He always made top marks before he transferred out of Hogwarts. He was even a Slytherin. He's the best bloody thing in the world." In a fit of frustration, Sirius took his text and threw it at the far wall. It hit with a bang. He just sat breathing hard for a moment. Then, in a softer voice, he said, "And what do they have with me?" He stood up as though to give his cousin a clear view of how flawed he was. It hurt her to see him like this. When they'd been growing up, he was her hero. When her sisters had tormented her, he'd always defended her. He'd even beaten his own brother up once. when Regulus had hurt her. Sirius had always been the strong, handsome, intelligent one. And somehow, coming from that family, he'd been the decent one, too. That was a feat all on its own. He'd seemed perfect, unbreakable. She clenched her fists as she looked at the frustrated, hurt boy in front of her. And that blasted family of his seemed to finally be breaking him little by little. They were destroying their own son, because he wasn't one of them. Sirius, she started. He shook his head and sat down, burying his face in his hands. I know what you're going to say, so don't. He looked up, taking a deep breath. I can't undo what's been done. I can't improve my old grades or change my sorting, but I sure as hell can ace my OWLs. I can be what they want. I can be as good as Regulus. Better even. There was a gleam in his eyes. Sure you can, Andromeda snapped. Of course you can be as good as Regulus and Narcissa and Bella and the others. God, Sirius, can't you see that you're better than them already? They're the ones who should be like you, not the other way around. A look of confusion flickered across his face, and Andromeda went with it. You don't need them, Sirius. Look around you. You have me. You have your friends. You don't have to put up with those people. She motioned with disgust toward the letter. They're my family, Sirius snapped. We're your family. James, Remus, Peter and I. You talked about running away last year. Why not just do it? James said he'd help. No. His voice was flat and held a finality that frightened her. His eyes were emotionless. They aren't my family. They're friends. Friends change. We'll probably never see each other again after Hogwarts. And you'll run off with Ted. And I'll be alone. He stood up and, scooping up his homework and letter, walked to the boys' dormitory. He paused at the stairs and glanced back at her. The difference between friends and family is that the Marauders and we don't matter as much to each other. I wouldn't die for them. And with that, he disappeared up the stairs. Silent tears flowed down Andromeda's face. She tried to tell herself that he was just tired and frustrated. He'd get over it and come to his senses. But then why did she feel like she'd spent the last 15 minutes fighting for his soul? And why did she feel like she'd lost? Harry Potter stepped into the living room with the mail. Not much that looked very good. A letter, the paper, a lot of bills, and some advertisements. The boy brushed his black hair out of his eyes and sighed, tucking the bills under the newspaper. His uncle wouldn't be happy to see those. Harry didn't want to upset him, especially now with him still feeling so ill. He tossed the mail onto a tray and put some breakfast on as well before carrying the tray to his uncle's bedroom. Harry knocked on the door, softly at first but louder when he got no response. Uncle Remus? Come in, Harry, came the soft reply. Harry opened the door and was surprised to see his uncle dressed and out of bed. Harry furrowed his brow in concern. Are you sure you should be up? Remus sent him a tired smile. There were dark shadows under his eyes, and he looked far too thin and frail to be walking around. Probably not, but I hate just lying in bed. If I stayed in bed every time I got sick, I'd never get a chance to live. He sat down on the edge of the bed and motioned for Harry to join him. Anyway, we need to get your school books today. Harry brightened. That's right. He'd be starting at Hogwarts soon. Maybe he could even talk Remus into letting him take a little extra out of his vault to buy an owl. At least then he could write easier to his uncle. Harry glanced at Remus, who had picked up the mail, allowing the paper to slip back onto the bed while he flipped through the bills. There was a strained look in his eyes. It was often hard for them to make ends meet, because Remus' condition often kept him out of work. No one wanted to hire a werewolf, and Remus refused to allow Harry to use any of his own money to help with the bills. That was another reason Harry was glad to go to Hogwarts. It would be one less person for Remus to worry about. But then again, his uncle would have no one to take care of him either. Harry sighed and picked up the paper. The picture on the front page immediately drew his eyes. It was a shot of Gringotts with healers taking people out. The dark mark floated in the air above the bank. Next to it was a picture of a handsome wizard, laughing. It was the picture they always used of Black, and it was clearly old. Honestly, Harry wondered where they'd gotten it. By the looks of him, he'd have sworn it was taken before Black had started killing. Harry's eyes traveled down to the article. Black strikes again. Is no place safe? Rita Skeeter. August 1st, 1991. Yesterday, the wizarding world was shaken once again as Gringotts Bank, known as one of the safest places in the wizarding community, was brutally attacked by a legion of Death Eaters out for some fun. No one is certain exactly what the Death Eaters were after, but with the variety of strange and useful treasures hidden in the bowels of Gringotts, one can only guess what twisted uses the Dark Lord could find. Some items on the possible list were the sword of Godric Gryffindor as well as a mirror with special powers. Some even go so far as to guess that he was after the Philosopher's Stone itself, although no one can confirm that any of these items reside at Gringotts at this time. Sources claim that the Death Eaters were led by none other than the Dark Lord's first-in-command, Sirius Black. Sirius Black is a name that has become almost as feared as the Dark Lord's own over the past 10 years. Once a student of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Black lived up to his family name, turning toward the dark arts after graduation, and eventually sealing his betrayal when he committed his first known attacks on October 31st, 1981, resulting in the deaths of Lily Evans Potter and James Potter. The only survivor of this brutal attack was their son, Harry James Potter, who was at that time staying with a family friend, Remus John Lupin. Since then, death has been a name synonymous with Black. There are rumors that the Minister of Magic has set a price on Black's head. Perhaps if they'd start taking the rumors of Black's upcoming attacks seriously, they could catch him in his tracks, rather than send rookie Aurors who are as likely to help Black as slow him. Let us hope that Black's death will come swiftly. Perhaps this will be enough to give our Aurors the edge they need to survive. Panic is at an all-time high, especially with the attack being right in Diagon Alley, only 1 month before classes commence at Hogwarts. Many are afraid to shop for their children. Many more are afraid to send them to school. If Gringotts can be breached, why not Hogwarts? Especially now. This year young Harry Potter, 11, son of Lily and James Potter, will attend the school. Will Black be able to ignore this temptation? Is there anywhere left that's safe? This reporter doesn't think so. Harry almost dropped the paper. This was insane. First Gringotts is broken into, and now they're talking like Black himself would want to target him? Harry Potter? Why would Black care about him? Remus had told him all about his parents' deaths years ago. Black had been working for Voldemort, and had been sent to convince his parents to switch sides in the rising war. They had refused, and that had resulted in death. It wasn't like they'd been specific targets. Why would Black feel the need to hunt him down now, 10 years later? Is something wrong, Harry? Remus said, sending the boy a concerned look. Harry blinked a couple of times and shook his head to snap out of it. Oh, sorry. It's just that crazy Skeeter woman again putting rubbish into the paper. He handed the prophet over to his uncle, who read the article with an increasingly concerned look on his face. Uncle Remus? Remus looked tired and ran his hand over his face. This isn't good. Harry sent him an odd look. What isn't good? She's probably made most of that up, especially the part about me. Remus just looked worried. I'd like to agree, but I think she unintentionally printed the truth this time. What? Harry felt cold. Remus held up the letter he'd been reading. It's from the headmaster, discussing 2 things. He sighed. The first is asking me if I would be willing to take a position as professor of defense against the dark arts at the school this year. That's great, Harry broke in. No, it isn't. The position is only open because one of those Death Eaters, presumably Black, killed the new professor in the Gringotts attack. Remus' expression was grave. Bill Weasley was a fine man. What's worse is that Black knew him. They were friends once, a long time ago. He paused, letting the darkness pass over him. The second thing the headmaster requested was that I go immediately to the ministry to request some sort of a guard for you. What? Harry broke in, wishing he could think of something more intelligent to say. Why? Don't tell me they're taking Skeeter's sources seriously. They are. Harry, there are things you don't know about Black. Things you don't need to know. But one of them is that his attacks are never a surprise. Somehow word is always leaked out before he attacks. No one knows who it is, but after the attack on Gringotts yesterday, the headmaster taking anything he hears about Black seriously, even if the ministry refuses to do so. Harry raised an eyebrow. And this includes scatterbrained newspaper reporters who get the facts right on accident in 1 out of every 50 stories? Remus tried to send Harry a stern look of reprimand, but it didn't quite work. They have other reasons to believe this one, and I'm afraid I have to agree this time. I would far rather be paranoid and see you safe, than assume it's a false alarm and lose you to Voldemort or Black. Same thing, isn't it? Harry muttered. No. Definitely not. Black doesn't work as effectively on other people's agendas. If he's the one after you, it will be for a different reason entirely. Harry scowled, pushing his glasses up his nose. But why would any of them want me? I'm nobody. And anyway, why do I need some kind of bodyguard? You'll be there, right? Isn't that good enough? Remus sighed. I wish I could say it is, but I'm not sure I could protect you against him. He trailed off, lost in thought. Harry shook his head, not understanding any of this. He stood up and began pacing, frustrated. Why? He asked. Really, if Black wanted me dead so badly, wouldn't he have hunted me down when he killed my parents? Why wait until now? I've always been safe with you before. I don't see why this is any different. Harry, Remus said sharply, immediately silencing the boy. His uncle never got angry unless he was extremely worried. It was enough to frighten Harry. He took a deep breath and continued. Black didn't hunt you down that night because your parents weren't the only ones who died. Black lost one of his own as well. Like that's ever stopped him before? Harry muttered, glancing back at the paper. That time it was different. It wasn't just some Death Eater. His cousin was caught in the crossfire, and if nothing else, Sirius Black is one of the most family-oriented wizards I've ever known. He wouldn't have been in any shape to hunt you down after that. But Black isn't the sort to allow a job to be left half-completed, even if it did take him a decade to get it done. And if you were part of the original plan, then you're still a target. He may have been waiting for you to enter Hogwarts to make his move, because it would get you away from me. Harry's eyes lit up. So, he wouldn't attack me if you're there. I didn't say that, but I know things about him. From his days in Hogwarts, it's harder for him to slip things by me. He sighed. Never mind, this isn't the point. You're still in danger, even if I do decide to take the position. All Black has to do is wait for a full moon, and I wouldn't be able to help you. You need someone to protect you. Someone without my weaknesses. This isn't up for negotiation. Do you want to go to Hogwarts this year? Of course. Then we visit the ministry first. That's final. He swept through the corridors of the Riddle Manor, his footsteps echoing loudly. For once, the elegant Death Eater looked disheveled. His cloak was gone, and his long black hair spilled over his shoulders. Dirt from his evasions in Gringotts was smudged on his clothing and face. And he was angry. For once, raw emotion flared in his normally cold, gray eyes. Fury was most easily visible, and many Death Eaters avoided him when they saw his scowl. They didn't wait to see the cold fear or confusion lingering just behind the burning anger. Yes, he had lost his prey. He knew the punishment for that, not that he'd ever particularly cared. He wasn't afraid of pain or death, but she had gotten to him. That girl who had been so like his cousin. She might have been a Dementor instead of an Auror, for the painful memories her face had forced to the surface. His scowl deepened as another Death Eater finally joined him. The Dark Lord will kill you one of these times, you know, Lucius Malfoy drawled. I don't know why he hasn't already with your attitude. Sirius didn't break stride as they turned a corner. He just shot a cool look at the blonde beside him. I'm an interesting pet, he remarked, And he'd rather break me than kill me. He finally stopped in front of a heavy door, his eyes dark. Malfoy raised an eyebrow. He'll get tired of you eventually. The Crucius Curse is only fun for so long. I know. And then he'll kill me. Tell Narcissa I may be late for supper. This wasn't a good day to have made plans. With that, he pulled the heavy door open and stepped into the chamber, shutting it behind him. He'd been in here a number of times before, but the room never seemed to loose its chill. It didn't help that the man sitting at the desk at the far end of the room had set his red eyes on him. Sirius walked forward and dropped to one knee before the room's occupant. "My lord, where is it?" His voice was very high, very gentle. That was usually a bad sign. It occurred to Sirius that maybe he should have skipped out of supper altogether tonight. "I failed you, my lord." "I see." The red eyes narrowed, but did not seem surprised. "And why would that be?" "I make no excuses. The Aurors have a moropharmagus, and I was taken by surprise. There is no acceptable reason." "Yes," Voldemort sneered. "Nymphadora Tonks. You knew that, Black. She is your cousin, after all. Why didn't you kill her?" Sirius kept his head bowed. "My duty was to obtain the contents of Vault 713, not to kill Aurors." "You spared her." The younger man looked up. "She is my cousin." "She's the enemy, Black. She chose her fate. Would she have spared you?" "I will not murder." His argument was cut off by the Crucius Curse, and he dropped to all fours, trying to contain a scream. He had his dignity. Voldemort could see him cry for all he cared, but he would not scream in hearing range of any Death Eaters. He took a deep, shuddering breath and looked up defiantly at Voldemort, daring him to do it. "I will not kill her," he wheezed. "I failed. Punish me for it. I will not regret sparing her." The second Crucius Curse hurt worse than the first. His arms gave out, and he collapsed to the floor, his breath coming in short, painful bursts. This is what Nymphadora had felt. He wasn't sure if he'd have done it if he'd immediately recognized her. He probably would have. Perhaps he'd have even killed her. But that wasn't the point. If he did it, he would do it not for the Dark Lord, but for himself. The third blast of the curse almost cut off his breathing entirely, and a small moan did finally escape him. "I should kill you, Black. Give me a reason not to kill you." Sirius coughed to clear his throat and felt blood. His voice was barely audible. "Because you can still use me." "Not good enough, Black," Voldemort growled. "A tool is only useful as long as it works. You're like a broken wand, as likely to backfire on its user as it is to do its job." Sirius coughed again and wiped his gloved hand over his mouth. Came away scarlet. Slowly, he forced his shaky, weakened arms to push him up. His cold gray eyes focused on the Dark Lord's amused red ones. "But even a broken wand has its uses," he whispered. "If I work, I'm useful. If I backfire, you can kill me. So far I've either worked, failed, or refused, but I haven't backfired." He took a deep breath and pushed himself to his knees, and then to his feet, although at that point, he had to use a nearby table for support. Voldemort's cold laughter rang through the room, chilling Sirius. "Interesting, you'll live today. But keep in mind, if you ever backfire, I won't kill you. I'll feed you to the Dementors. How well do you value your soul, Black? Think on that." He turned his back on the proud Death Eater. "Leave. I will contact you later." Sirius managed a stiff bow and slowly forced himself into a relatively natural pace, using most of his reserves. He was going to feel like hell later. He swept back through the halls to an exit where he could apparate, his mind replaying Voldemort's last words to him. "How well do I value my soul?" Sirius snorted, forcing him to cough again. He staggered on that step and barely caught himself on the wall. "How well do I value it? I gave that up a long time ago." Sirius was going to be even later for dinner than he'd expected. 3 blasts from the Crucius Curse was hard for anyone to get over, especially coming from Voldemort. Sirius knew that the only reason he'd been able to make it home to Grimmauld Place had been from sheer stubbornness and pride. The moment he was in his living room, Sirius had collapsed to the floor, unable to force himself to move any further. He awoke an hour later in his bed. Clearly, Creature had moved him. Sirius remained motionless. Searing pain was shooting through his entire body, immobilizing him. The Death Eater grimaced. It was getting worse. Sirius was the highest-ranked and most feared Death Eater for good reason. He was Voldemort's pet, the only one who could stand up to the Dark Lord time after time and not be killed. Sirius worked on his own schedule. If it happened to overlap Voldemort's plans, that was an added bonus. For that, the other Death Eaters feared, if and respected him. Not surprisingly, Voldemort didn't view it that way, and for his transgressions, Sirius was always punished. Always the same way. Gingerly, he tried to sit up, and was quickly rewarded with icy fingers of pain driving through his entire body. Again, he lay back against the pillow. The Crucius Curse did not cause permanent physical damage. Never in history had it done so, but then again, never in recorded history had anyone felt the brunt of it as often as Sirius had. He was starting to realize that even someone as strong as he was could not withstand it forever. The curse was starting to have long-term effects on him. He could feel his body failing from the inside out, and it became worse with each exposure. He was slowing down, simple things were straining him more, wearing him out more quickly, hurting him more easily. Lucius had no idea how right he'd been when he'd said that Voldemort would kill him one day, although it wouldn't be the Avada Kedavra that would do it. Sirius closed his eyes, trying to at least escape into sleep for a couple of hours before he'd have to deal with any new effects the curse had on his body. He could feel his heart still racing, which was something he'd have to check on as soon as he could get up again, as it was the most likely part of him to fail at this point. He hadn't been asleep long when a deformed, old house elf hobbled into the room, waking him again. "Master is getting himself hurt again," he muttered to himself. "The boy is going to die if he isn't careful." The Death Eater gritted his teeth and tried to ignore him. Master should know better than to upset the Dark Lord. He thinks no one knows what's happening to him, but Creature notices things. Creature knows. "Shut up, house elf," Sirius snapped, forcing himself to move. "Was there a point to your visit?" Creature sneered at his master, but bowed low. "Of course, master. So sorry to wake master up." "I'm sure you are," the wizard muttered, relieved to find that he could pull himself to a sitting position without too much pain. "Master has slept a long time. Mistress Narcissa has fired the house, and would like to know if master intends to come for dinner sometime before breakfast." Sirius nodded and stood. He still needed to lean against the wall for support, but it was better. He took a deep breath before responding. "Fire her back, and tell her I will arrive shortly." Creature nodded and hobbled out of the room, still mumbling to himself. Sirius watched him leave, grateful that he was gone. Honestly, he hated the bugger and hoped he would die, but he'd made a promise to his mother not to help the process along, no matter how much he'd wanted to. Sirius was starting to think that promise had been a bad idea. Maybe it wouldn't count as breaking it if he just set up an accident. Accidentally tell Creature to play in traffic or something. Slowly, Sirius walked to his closet, feeling more like himself with each step. That was good, because one thing was for certain: no one could know what was happening to him. If they found out, he'd be fed to the wolves. A ghost of a smile flickered upon his face, as a very old memory surfaced briefly. No, it was the other horrors of the night he had to worry about. Wolves he could deal with. Absolutely not. Barty Crouch, the Minister of Magic, boomed across his spacious office in the ministry. Before him sat two individuals, a young boy and a thin and faded man who claimed to be his uncle. Crouch knew who the boy was. He knew what the boy stood for, probably better than the boy did himself, but that did not mean that the Minister of Magic of all people had to bow down to their every whim. The proper-looking older man stared them down from his chair. The boy looked away, but interestingly enough, there was something hard and firm in the man's amber eyes that would not allow him to break eye contact. Frail though he appeared, Remus Lupin was made of stronger stuff than that. And clearly he did not intend to back down. Minister Crouch, Lupin said quietly, perhaps you don't understand the situation. Harry will be attending Hogwarts this year. The headmaster himself has determined that someone needs to be there to protect him. Black is dangerous, and if he decided to go after Harry, then I'm not sure even that place would be safe. Crouch seemed to puff up at that. Preposterous. Hogwarts falling to one man. Next you'll be saying that Black is more dangerous than you know who. And even he could never breach the school. Remus glared at him. Minister, I'll remind you that when Voldemort last attacked the school, it was under different circumstances. Crouch winced at the use of the Dark Lord's name, but continued. Targeting this boy, he snorted, motioning to Harry. If he were so important, then Black would have taken him by now. It's as simple as that. He glanced over at the Auror sitting in the corner, serving as witness to this ridiculous conversation. Isn't that right, Hampton? You've dealt with Black before. Stanton nodded shortly, managing not to cringe at the slaughtering of his name. Black isn't exactly predictable, but if he were currently after Harry, we could guarantee getting wind of the plans. However, Crouch cut the older Auror off before he could get much further. You see, I would suggest that if the headmaster feels that young Harry here needs a guard, that perhaps he can provide one of his own. Lupin's eyes narrowed dangerously, and he said darkly, That is not acceptable, Minister. At least talk with the headmaster. Perhaps, Mr. Lupin, you don't understand that currently we are at war. And we are at war with you-know-who, not one of his generals. In a war, we have to make sacrifices, but sacrificing experienced fighters just to watch over every child with a sad story is ridiculous. So, you would rather sacrifice the child then, Lupin said. Harry scowled. Hey, I'm not just some kid, he spat. Lupin laid a gentle hand on the young boy's shoulder to quiet him. This boy is under my care. Then by all means, take care of him, Crouch growled, cutting him off. But take him out of this office. Minister, Stanton's voice was unexpected from the sidelines, silencing both men. Might I offer a suggestion? Crouch grunted, and Stanton took that as an invitation to continue. Might I suggest giving them Miss Tonks as a guard for the boy? She is a first-year Auror, and not experienced enough to be any real loss to the division. Not to mention the fact that she is still recovering from her last brush with Death Eaters, so she isn't going to be in active Auror duty anytime soon. She sounds as though she would be an appropriate option. The Auror fell silent, allowing the minister to consider his words. Lupin opened his mouth to protest at the exact moment Crouch responded. Excellent. Yes, that would work. She is an Auror and would be a respectable babysitter for the boy. I don't need a babysitter, Harry shot back. His uncle tightened his grip on Harry's shoulder. Harry's life is worth more than a wounded, inexperienced Auror, Lupin snapped. The minister leaned forward again, stating, This is your option. It's either Miss Tonks, or you leave my office and let the headmaster know that he needs to find the boy a guard on his own time. Consider it. He leaned back in his chair. Hampton, please show these two out. If they decide to take your advice, they can make arrangements with your division leader. Stanton nodded and led Harry and an enraged Remus out of the room. This isn't acceptable, the werewolf growled to Stanton as soon as they were in the hall. Even if you haven't gotten wind of Black's plans, that doesn't mean he hasn't made any. Black is more intelligent than that. I don't know how you get your information. Neither do we, Stanton said simply. Lupin stopped ranting. What? Stanton began leading them down a twisting labyrinth of hallways and ramps. At first, we believed they were just rumors. Just before an attack, somehow we would get word. But it was too regular. Rumors always have a grain of truth to them, but when it came to Black, they were never wrong. And the only people privy to this information are those close to Black. One of Black's own Death Eaters is betraying him. He sighed. It would be a great help if the Minister of Magic would take the warning seriously, But to him, these rumors are no more accurate than the Quibbler. If we could get our hands on the Dark Lord's traitor, maybe we could get somewhere. They turned a few more corners and went through a door. Harry was already getting dizzy and confused. The Ministry was worse to navigate than Gringotts. So, someone's betraying Black? Harry blinked up in surprise at Remus' dark tone. Stanton chuckled. Exactly. He didn't say any more until they were through a small group of witches and wizards taking a break in the hall. Don't worry, we'll get him eventually. He'll be sent to Azkaban, won't he? Harry asked. Azkaban was known to be the worst prison in the wizarding world. Prisoners didn't last long there, going mad from the isolation, silencing and blinding spells. They said in Azkaban you didn't need torture because you could torture yourself. Without the ability to hear or see anything around them, the prisoners quickly became lost in their own minds. No one ever escaped. Few even survived a year. It was the worst sort of punishment imaginable. Stanton nodded to the boy. Most likely, that is, if he isn't thrown into the death chamber. Some killers are considered too dangerous even for the prison. Pain flickered in Remus' eyes. Hopefully that's what he'll get, the werewolf said quietly. It's kinder than Azkaban. No one deserves that place. Harry's expression hardened. He killed my parents. He deserves it. Remus shook his head, but wouldn't make eye contact with the boy. No, Harry. I've seen that place. No one deserves that. Not even the worst. And Black wasn't always. He swallowed and broke off. Forget it. Uncle Remus? Remus wouldn't look at him, turning instead back to Stanton. So, the Aurors have received no message about Black concerning Harry? And that's enough to assume he's safe. We have no word about it, but that's no guarantee. It's always possible that Black has already found his traitor and disposed of him. And knowing this, you suggest an inexperienced first year? The Auror smiled. I understand your concern, but you don't know the minister as well as I do. If I hadn't suggested Tonks, you wouldn't have had anyone at all. And I think you'll find more use in this Auror than you'd expect. His secretive smile quieted Remus and drew Harry's interest. Why? The boy asked. Because what the minister fails to realize is that the wounds Nymphadora Tonks is recovering from came from Black himself. She was one of the survivors of the Gringotts attack, and she is the only person I've ever seen that Black hesitated to kill. Remus blinked back his surprise. He hesitated? Stanton nodded, turning a corner and reaching a wall lined in elevators. He pushed the up button. We still don't know why, but if you can't get someone experienced enough to kill him, I would think your next best bet would be to get someone lucky enough to survive him. An elevator door opened, and after 3 witches in heels and power suits strode off, Stanton led them in. The choice is up to you, of course, but at least consider it. Remus nodded shortly. Thank you for all your help. Stanton smiled. Floor 8 gets you out of here. Floor 6 brings you to the head of the Aurors. Wish I could do more. He winked. And remember, I never told you anything. Auror business is top secret. With that, he let go of the doors so they slid shut with a whoosh. Harry looked up at his uncle. Well? He asked. Remus didn't answer. He just pushed 6 on the panel and hoped he was making the right choice. Tonks scowled fiercely at Stanton. She knew the older man was ignoring her, and she knew he'd had every right to suggest her as bodyguard to this kid, especially since she wasn't good for anything else right now. But still, it infuriated her that she was going to spend the next several months babysitting some kid when she should be helping the other Aurors in the war against the Dark Lord. She glanced over at Harry and Lupin, who had joined them recently in Stanton's small office. Harry looked about as impressed as she felt. Well, at least they had something in common. Both of them had put up some pretty forceful arguments as to why this was a bad idea, and both of them had been politely shot down by their elders. Lupin smiled at her. Miss Tonks, you have no idea how grateful we are that you're taking the time to help us. He shot a silencing look at Harry before he could protest. She forced a smile and said nothing. He continued, I expect you've had the situation explained to you. Why Harry needs someone to keep an eye on him. Tonks raised an eyebrow, glancing back at Stanton. Actually, no. I was told that it was none of my business, and that I was going to watch him whether I liked it or not. If her response was supposed to faze the Auror, it didn't work, annoying her further. Ah, Lupin smiled faintly. Then you're probably under the assumption that I'm just an overprotective uncle, afraid to let his nephew leave the house. Not at all, Tonks said, smiling genuinely for the first time since she'd gotten there. She couldn't help but like this man. I didn't know you were his uncle. He laughed softly. Her expression turned serious as she forced the conversation back to its point. So, if you aren't just being overprotective, then why does Harry need Auror protection? Lupin's eyes darkened. Do you read the paper, Miss Tonks? Tonks snorted, twirling strands of her spiky pink hair. Not when I can help it. In my opinion, the Daily Prophet isn't any more reliable than the Quibbler, now that they've let that Skeeter idiot write. Harry tried to cover up his laughter, unsuccessfully. Yes, Lupin said softly, nudging the boy to quiet him. Facts have tended to get a bit skewed lately, but their recent articles have actually been hitting some fair points of worry. About what? Sirius Black. Tonks' eyes widened, and she shot a look at the kid. Black? What would he want with Harry? A painful expression was on Lupin's face. I'm sure you've heard something about Black's first victims? Tonks scowled. Yeah, who hasn't? Her eyes widened as things began falling into place. Wait a minute. You mean he's that Harry? He's Harry Potter? Their kid. The thin, graying man nodded. Yes, I was a friend of theirs, and was entrusted with his care when his parents died. He looked troubled. But Black was never one to leave things unfinished. If given the opportunity, I believe he'll try to take Harry. Now, according to Mr. Stanton, you've managed to survive a run-in with Black. Better yet, being a morphomagus, you can slip into the school without drawing suspicion or embarrassment. He smiled ruefully. Harry wasn't fond of the idea that he was going to have an Auror following around where everyone could see. But perhaps if you could be disguised. As a student, you mean? Tonks exclaimed. She winced at the sound of her own voice, knowing how whiny it sounded. But she'd had a hard enough time getting through Hogwarts once. There was no way in hell she wanted to have to do it again, even if grades didn't matter this time. That's precisely what we mean, Stanton growled, shooting her a harsh glare. Not just to ease Harry's embarrassment, although that is an extra perk, but also for security. I'm sure Black knows by now that there is to be an Auror guarding Harry. But even if he has gotten word as to who it is, if he can't identify you, it will be difficult for him to eliminate either of you. And it will give you an edge if he decides to risk attacking Harry anyway. That's comforting, Tonks muttered, fiddling with her pink hair again. She grew it out a few inches so it would be easier to twirl. Stanton glared again, but she ignored him, pointing out what she considered an obvious flaw in the plan. All right, so say I agree to do this. She ignored Stanton's outraged snort and Lupin's amused smile. Say I agree, and play the part of the little first year. I would assume that the plan would be for me to be in a position where I can constantly watch him. We have a situation, then. First of all, I would need to be in common room. The only way to do that would be if I were sorted into his house, which is something that can't be fixed. Now, we could avoid the sorting hat by just transferring me in as an exchange student, but then I wouldn't be a first year and couldn't be in his classes. So that isn't an option. I would have to be sorted. Next problem, she continued, counting off on her fingers, is the fact that all Black would have to do is break into the common room while everyone is asleep. I can't protect him then. I'll be in a different dorm. She trailed off as a horrible thought struck her. And judging by the looks on both Stanton and Lupin's face, this was something that had already been discussed in her absence. Oh no, she announced, waving her hands in front of her face. No, 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 no. You're gonna give me enough of a complex making me playing an 11-year-old. I am not playing a boy. Do you have any idea how much therapy I'll need by the time I'm through with my assignment? I have enough issues. It's the only way, Stanton said tiredly. Listen, Tonks, I know that this is a less than ideal situation, but our hands are tied. You're the only one that the minister is willing to spare. We need someone watching Potter 24/7, which means you're going to have to be a male student in his house. As to the sorting, the headmaster has already dealt with that issue. You are simply going to miss the Hogwarts Express and arrive after the sorting. That way, your sorting will be a private affair in the headmaster's office. He's already agreed to it. We just need your word now. Tonk's face was buried in her hands. This wasn't fair. 7 years in Hogwarts. 3 years training as an Auror and a year of active duty for this, she got to be a cross-dressing student who couldn't even manage to catch the train. She blushed a little. Not even cross-dressing, really. More like, her face reddened worse. Oh God. Tonks. I'll do it, she muttered. Then her head snapped up and there was something fierce in her eyes. But it isn't because I was asked or ordered. You all need to understand this. I'm agreeing to this for one reason only. Her eyes narrowed. It's my responsibility to deal with Black. He's my cousin, so it's my job. If anyone has a chance against him, it's me, and honestly, I have to do it. For my mother. He hesitated. He was always her favorite cousin when they were kids, and his turning. She shook her head. I have to do this for Mother. Tonks was startled into silence when Lupin laid a gentle hand on her shoulder. I understand. He was a close friend during our school days. A brother almost. Harry's green eyes widened at his uncle's words. They were friends? His uncle was friends with Black, one of the most notorious killers the wizarding world had known. He stared at his uncle as though expecting Remus at any moment to admit it was only some sort of sick joke. Only Remus' eyes were serious, dead serious. The pale man continued softly, I know what you're feeling, but he is not the same man he was back in school. Then, I'd have died for him then, but he killed that part of himself. He tore it apart when he took the mark and the Sirius Black that I knew that your mother knew. He was no more. There is nothing good left in him to save. Tonks nodded silently, her eyes flashing darkly. I know. That's why I have to do this. For my mother, I'll kill him. Kill him so he can't keep destroying himself through murder, and so he can't keep tearing apart what my mother saw in him. I'll avenge the man he once was by killing what he's become. Sirius sat alone in front of a fire in Grimmauld Place. The old book he'd been looking at sat forgotten on his lap as he stared into the blaze, lost in thought. It had been 2 weeks since his encounter at Gringotts. 2 weeks, and he still hadn't been able to put thoughts of that girl out of his mind. Nymphadora Tonks, Andromeda's daughter. He winced at the memories. He sighed. This was just going to make things more complicated. God knew the stupid girl was still young. She'd probably gotten it into her head that he wouldn't hurt her since he'd hesitated once. And now, from what he'd been hearing, the girl was being assigned to protection work at Hogwarts. Brilliant. He scowled. The flickering firelight cast shadows upon his face, intensifying the lines and making him appear older than his years. No matter. He felt old, anyway. Sirius finally stood and dropped the book onto his chair. He needed to start preparing. He'd been given a new assignment, and this time, he wasn't sure if defiance was worth the price. Sirius had been given 2 weeks to recover before Voldemort had contacted him again. When he'd first taken the Dark Mark, 2 weeks would have been plenty of time. Crucius curse or not, he'd have been his old self in a few days. But he wasn't so young anymore, and 2 weeks wasn't no longer enough time. Sirius moved slowly, feeling the mark on his arm burning, trying to hurry him along. He felt like an old man, quick movements paining him, and his heart racing with everything he did. He was starting to think that this time it wasn't going to go away, that maybe he didn't have much longer. Not that it would bother him much. What did he have to live for? An empty house? The little family he had left alive? Creature? What had he fought for? He'd made his choice, taken this burden upon himself all for them, and what had come of it? He was a Death Eater, famous, notorious. His parents would be proud if they were alive. Narcissa was thrilled, as it gave her family an extra in with the Dark Lord. And he'd lost Andromeda. He'd done this for his family, but this wasn't the first time he'd wondered. Had he given up his true family when he'd marked himself? The only thing so far that had kept him from completely succumbing to the darkness, the only thing still separating him from the rest of them was his defiance. If he did not agree with the assignment or details of it, then he would not do it. As simple as that. He had no value for his own life anymore. It wasn't worth anything anyway. But now his body was failing him, and he had a sneaking fear that his courage would soon follow. What would he be worth if he completely succumbed? Sirius shook his head, blocking those thoughts from his mind. He didn't need this now. He would be working on his new assignment shortly, and that was what he needed to be thinking about. He couldn't risk failure again. He'd just do his job and get the hell out of there. Sirius pulled an old, folded parchment from the book's pages, slipping it into his robes. He forced himself into a natural stride and walked into the entranceway, pulling a cloak from the closet and slipping it on. He glanced into the mirror, and after convincing himself that he didn't appear any worse for the wear, apparat to Riddle Manor, where he would await his final instructions. The photo album he'd been looking at remained on the chair for Creature to put away. That useless house elf needed something to do other than talking to Medea's portrait anyway. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the room empty except for the old black and white photograph waving from the album. A picture of 4 friends who'd never dreamed that they'd be torn apart.